Welcome to Moss Park TV. I'm Gabriel Meissner, and today we're bringing you coverage from the People's Assembly for Housing Justice, a powerful two-day gathering held at 163 Queen Street East, 4th floor in downtown Toronto. Organized by groups like the 230 Fightback, the York South-Weston Tenant Union, the Regent Park Neighbourhood Association, the Moss Park Coalition, and others, the Assembly brought together housing justice organizers, activists, and tenants from across the city to confront Toronto's growing housing crisis. Friday evening, April 25th, kicked off with an opening panel discussion focusing on one of the most urgent issues of our time, the financialization of housing and its impact on low-income communities. Speakers included John Clarke from 230 Fightback, Walied Khogali from the Regent Park Neighbourhood Association, Chiara Padovani from the York South-Weston Tenant Union, and Lorraine Lam from the Shelter and Housing Justice Network. Panelists spoke about the importance of building tenant power through grassroots organizing and emphasized that the fight for housing must be led by working class and poor communities themselves. Saturday continued with a full day of workshops, strategy discussions, and community building, all aimed at strengthening collective action and demanding housing as a human right. RPTV reporter Fred Alvarado was on location Friday night to capture the opening panel. Let's take a look.
Welcome to People's Assembly for Housing Justice. Just so people know, this has been organized by a group of about 14 grassroots organizations. We've been working on this since about mid-January, and we're so proud to see this turnout. Thank you so much for coming out tonight. And we have 4 panelists that will be speaking, and we've left hopefully about a half hour for questions if people, a bit of a discussions to have. So, yeah. So I just want to start. Normally, there's a kind of a standard land acknowledgements that we do, but I normally do these differently. And what I want to do is I want to talk about people. I don't know if people know this area at all. One of the oldest working class neighborhoods in Toronto. One of the largest concentrations of social services, hostels. Everything here, it's been here for a long, long time. It's undergoing a huge transformation, as you can see. But over the last 3 decades, some of us have been organizing here. We have a large indigenous population in this area, many of them suffering on these streets. But I want to talk about a protest that was very, very significant that happened here on December 15th, 1994. I don't know if people were around back then, but there was a protest. It got called Revenue Res, because just south of here is where the Revenue Canada is, the building. 27 Indigenous people went and took over the 5th floor of Revenue Canada on December 15th. They demanded, because the federal government had passed a tax law that was going to affect Native people, and they were fighting to get that taxation law eliminated. It was coming into effect on January 1st. They demanded that Chrétien come and negotiate with them. And Chrétien, the Minister of Indian Affairs, refused to do that. So they held the 5th floor of Revenue Canada for 29 days, and they were there. The other thing that was significant is while that protest was going on, there was a courtyard outside. And in the courtyard, a tipi was set up. It was winter, people set up a fire, and there was a group, as many as 60 supporters, supporting them throughout that protest. And I want to end by saying this. One of the things that really struck me around that protest, many of the Indigenous people that I knew who suffered on these streets went to that protest and stayed regularly. And the transformation of watching these people like Philip Toulouse, William Toulouse, a whole bunch of people that were going there, and to watch that transformation of them watching their people fighting back. because these streets are tough, really tough. So I remember, you know, in the evening I would see the flames. I could see their faces, and I could see how proud they were. And I mention this because it's so important for us to have collective organization, to collective actions, to bring people together, to remove people from that suffering, and to come together and march on these streets and do that kind of stuff. And that protest on December 15th, which lasted over a month, was wonderful. They eventually walked out, walked to the City Hall. Nobody was arrested, but it was a great thing. So I'm hoping that in the spirit of that protest and the spirit of other important protests, that the group tonight, and tomorrow, that we can somehow come together and move forward to build a movement that will begin to address some of the issues that our communities are facing. I want to bring people's attention to Fred over here from Regent Park TV. So Regent Park TV will be taping the whole thing, and I don't know if he was to turn his camera on the crowd, which would be nice if anybody would have any objections, but is anybody here would be really against having their picture taken if Fred wanted to show who was here? I think it would be nice to show them. I don't see any objection. And by the way, Regent Park TV has been so supportive in the Dundas and Sherburne and Regent Park, and they do wonderful coverage of events like this in press conferences. And I know they just covered a really good press conference around the consumption sites closing and stuff, and it's important. And not right now, but after this meeting, if you could go to Regent Park TV and subscribe, it's really important because their funding depends on them having more and more subscriptions. So I really encourage people, one, to see the stuff that they're doing in terms of writing about this neighborhood, because they focus on this neighborhood, but also give them that support by subscribing. So we're ready to go, and I think what I'm going to do, which is really, I'm bad at names, and I'm going to let people introduce themselves, if people don't mind. That's probably the best way to do it, and I won't murder anybody's name. Even John Clarke, no, is it Clarke or Clarke? Sorry. And let me if you turn it on, I'll give you some volume and
all right, how's that sound?
So each speaker will speak for about 10 to 12 minutes. At the end, we should have some time for questions and answers. So to the panelists, here you go.
All right, hi everyone. My name is Chiara. Should I stand? Can everyone see me sitting? Maybe I'll stand so the folks in the back can see me. My name is Chiara Padovani. I was told I will be your first speaker today. I am the co-chair of the York South-Weston Tenant Union. Thank you. Give it up. You got to be loud so they hear you all the way in the north. Thank you so much. So I wanted to share with you today the story of some of our collective victories and exactly how we got there to, share some lessons and really the power and importance of collective organizing. That's the one thing I really want you to take away from my remarks, is that power that we have when we come together as regular people, like regular people coming together and organizing with one another to make change. And that's what we've been able to do in the York South-Weston Tenant Union, even when all the odds were stacked against us. When we started, they told us it was going to be impossible. Our own friends were like, oh my God, a rent strike? Are you kidding? That's so dangerous. Think about how big these guys are. They have more money than you. They have fancy lawyers. They have more real estate than you. But you know what they didn't have more of? People. That's right. That's right. And they sure as hell underestimated the power of people when we come together. And so even though all of those odds were stacked against us, all right? Our landlords were jacking up rents higher than we can afford, higher than inflation, definitely higher than our wages, right? We had buildings that were rent controlled and not rent controlled on our rent strikes. And in both cases, those increases were happening higher than our wages could keep up, far higher. Nobody was getting a 10% increase, but you know what? Nobody was getting a 5 or 3% increase in their jobs every year either. So we had landlords jacking up our rents. We had politicians of every level and every stripe catering to the needs of our landlords and developers more than to the people living and voting for them in their communities, right? Politicians, conservatives, liberals were either drinking the Kool-Aid of supply and demand is the only thing that matters, and we got to just give them everything we can possibly give them, land, money to feed the monster, right? The monster that David Harvey talks about in the film, at the expense of people. What else was happening? We had the Prime Minister at the time, Justin Trudeau, handing over millions in public dollars and public land to for-profit private developers in the sake of solving the affordable housing crisis. Well, we know, the people in this room, that that is the opposite of what we need, right? So that was happening in the context of our rent strike. What else was happening? Well, Doug Ford was doing the same thing, except not only was Doug Ford giving away public land and public money to developers, but he was removing rent control. One of the most basic protections that tenants had and fought for to get back, Doug Ford came in and removed that. Then what else was happening? Well, we had the LTB, the LTB, Landlord and Tenant Board. Landlord and Tenant Board, man, is where movements go to die, all right? If we are depending on the Landlord and Tenant Board to save us, we are going to be so disappointed. And that's why with us in our York South-Weston Tenant Union, we really fight and organize outside of that legal system. We have to look for ways to fight outside of that legal system because the LTB is stacked for landlords. I'm going to say it loud and clear. There is a reason why tenant applications take 3 to 4 times longer to get heard at the LTB than landlord applications, right? So that was another card stacked against us, okay? And all the while, to add insult to injury, all of these things, laws were being catered to our landlords, money was being handed over to our landlords, public land was being handed over to our landlords, rent control and tenant protections were being taken away. On top of that, rent's jacking up higher than we can afford, and then oh God, and COVID, I mean, half our members didn't even get to benefit from the rent freeze that happened in COVID because it didn't apply to more than half of our members in our tenant union. But then the landlords that had all of the things in their favor, right? They were up there, they had lots of things, cards in their favor. They had the best cards dealt to them. We're not even keeping up with their basic responsibility. When a landlord, you have one job, and it is maintain your buildings, right? We had buildings in our rent strike that were in such a state of disrepair that Canada Post refused to deliver mail to the buildings because they were in a state of such disrepair. All right, so even when all the cards are in their favor, these guys weren't even keeping up with their basic responsibilities. That was the context of our rent strikes. And so, you know, you gotta ask yourself, you're living in this situation, you're like, do I just accept that this is just the way things are now? This is just the way life is as a tenant in the city? Or do we organize to do something about it? And the folks in the York South-Weston Tenant Union, obviously, decided to organize and do something about it. And so we had hundreds of members come together in 4 different high-rise buildings to start organizing to stand up to these. Yeah, sure, the cards were stacked against us, but it doesn't mean we're going to roll over and just quit and accept that this is just the way things are. But here's the thing, when you're going up against a Goliath, right, that monster that David Harvey talked about, that is capitalism and that is our landlords in this city, when you're going up against a Goliath like that, you have to get organized. You don't need one David, all right? There's no single David that's going to save us in this situation. You need an army of Davids that are organized and mobilized and unionized, fighting against this Goliath, okay? So that's what we decided to do in the York South-Weston Tenant Union. We started small. What did we start with? We started with a couple petitions, some meetings in the buildings. We presented these petitions to the landlords. They ignored us. We requested for meetings with the landlord to go over the issues. They ignored us. And then we tried to bring our grievances to the LTB, but we know what happens there. Tenant applications are ignored, take forever to be heard. We got a little bit braver and we're like, okay, petitions didn't work. We put up signs on our front doors so that our neighbors would see, hey, we're not taking this anymore. Our next door neighbors would see that. And then we got even braver and we put up banners on our balconies so that the whole neighborhood could see that we're not taking this anymore. We tried to meet with our local representatives, Michael Ford, Ahmed Hussein, who's our MP, and Francis Nunziata. Not a single one of them took a meeting with us. Okay? So these are all the things we tried to do and organized collectively to do before it got to the point where we had to ask ourselves the question again. We've done this all. We've spent years doing this. Rents are still going up, and our buildings are still in serious disrepair. So do we give up, or do we do something that makes it impossible for them to ignore us any longer? And in the York South-Weston Tenant Union, we decided that we were going to go on a rent strike. We went on a rent strike for 16 months. It was a grueling rent strike. Yeah, give it up. You know what? Yes, that in and of itself is a victory. That rent strike had 600 people participating in withholding their rent in order to show collective power and stand up to the injustices they were facing every day when it came to rent increases and their standard of living in their homes. 16 months. Our landlords pretended we didn't exist. They said there was no union, no such thing as a rent strike, no such thing as a tenant union. That's not a thing. There's no such thing as that. That's what they were saying. And after 16 months, we made history. And we made history because we worked and stayed at it and continued to organize despite how long it took and despite some pitfalls along the way. We organized and we came to, in 2 of the buildings, won a collective bargain agreement, where now, in addition to some other things, which I'm not allowed to say, but they were good. In addition to that, we won in a building where the landlord refused to acknowledge that the tenant union existed. If they ever wanted to evict one of our members, again, they had to go through the union first. And we won that in that agreement. So suddenly, something that is usually so scary, so personal, so like isolating, like an eviction, goes from being something really, really scary to something really, really empowering and a sign of our collective strength as a tenant union after that rent strike. So we won that agreement. We won clauses like that that have had an ongoing impact for the people in that building, in addition to the top secret stuff, which, you know, I'm being recorded now, so I can't say anything more than that. The other buildings with some of the worst conditions we've ever seen that had been like that for 10 years, just under, finally got every single one of their units repaired. We're talking like before and after home makeover, guys. Like these were serious repairs that over 100 tenants got because they organized together with their neighbors and refused to accept that was okay. That's not all we won. I'm checking my notes because the list is long, man. You got to keep receipts because sometimes it gets grueling out there. You know, sometimes it is really, really tough to keep going. And you feel like, oh, shit, man. Another one, another increase, another, you know, slumlord, another piece of land being given away to a for-profit developer. And you just think, God, this is such a slug. So I like to keep receipts, and I like to keep a list of the things that we've won to remind me that these things are possible and they can continue to be possible. So as a result of our rent strike, we also uncovered the use of price fixing in the housing market. And because we organized with our members, sent more than 100 complaints, protested outside the Competition Bureau of Canada, they are finally launching a formal investigation into price fixing in our housing market in Canada. But that's not all. Because of that rent strike and that organizing, every single landlord we identified as having used price-fixing technology has now publicly come out and said, we have stopped the use of this technology. And they've stopped it because we organized and forced them to. And I'm going to throw this one in there too. We just got confirmation about this yesterday. We're not just like we've been expanding, okay? The tenant union is expanding. People are hungry to organize for a decent place to call home and an affordable place to call home. So our tenant union is growing. And just today, yesterday, we got confirmation of a new deal with a landlord of a new affiliate building that put $1 million back into the pockets of the tenants who live there. $1 million because they organized, because they said, I don't care what the law says. I don't care if you have this signed by the LTB. I don't care about any of that stuff. This rent is too expensive, and you've got to negotiate with me. And they just won $1 million back into their pockets from their landlord. We got confirmation of that today. So this is the power of what collective organizing can do, all right? And these are giants. These are giants. These are not the same like poor little landlords the news always likes to talk about. Okay, these are massive real estate companies that have completely changed the way housing functions in our cities. And we are taking them on. And we are winning when we work together. So those are my remarks, just as examples of some of the things that we've won. If there is one thing that you take away from my remarks today, it is David and Goliath stories. They don't happen very often, okay? But when they do, it's because David got organized with his neighbors, he got mobilized with his neighbors, and he got unionized with his neighbors. And this is the kind of work that I am so excited to be doing with all of you tomorrow. We're going to be diving deep into it, and we are going to be taking on the giants of this city. And when we do it together, my friends, we can and will win.
Basically, we have black refugees and newcomers being forced to sleep out in the cold while there were empty shelter beds, recommendations that were just adopted by City Council, addressing anti-black racism that we know exists. So we have to also appreciate the context of what's going on, right? Racialized folks are getting evicted, my friends. And I'm gonna quickly speak about this amazing opportunity for us to collaborate collectively. So, as a neighborhood association, we work with other neighborhood associations across the city of Toronto. And we actually took a chance and applied to the Tenant Protection Fund to fund a public education campaign focused on the rights, right? The rights of tenants. And we were able to secure some funding to do some important work, which is do research. So I want to invite you folks to work with us through the coalition that we have built. We've got a great steering committee being represented. We'll have representation from federal, provincial, and city organizations. So there's going to be a lot of collaboration about intergovernmental policy that impact tenants. And one of the things that I know to be true because I'm a community organizer is that it's systemic, right? It's, for example, finding out that you are actually getting evicted on the day of an eviction by a sheriff because there was a tribunal hearing about you being charged hundreds of thousands of dollars for elevator damages. And that person is on ODSB. That person's, the entire income goes to paying their the housing costs. So imagine that happens. And this happens to racialized women, black women. And there's a lot of data that actually we're going to be exploring at a policy level. And one of the things that I'm doing to support this work is I serve on the Confronting Anti-Black Racism Advisory Committee for the city. And we're actually talking about recommendations that are coming from the Ontario Human Rights Commission that speak to the impact of overcharging. And overcharging leads to people being evicted from social housing. It creates the crisis that we're trying to address as a community right now. And if we believe that housing is a basic human right, I think it's critically important for all of you to get involved in some way. Join your neighborhood association, join a group, join any group, organization that we're speaking of, whether it's a tenants union, a neighborhood association, any space to be a spark in the conversation that focuses on affordability of housing, because housing is a basic human right, and we need to stop this attack on our communities that's displacing a lot of our neighbors, people we love, our family. So thank you so much, and I hope you all appreciate the importance of getting involved and addressing this crisis at a policy level. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Lorraine. My pronouns are she, her. I wear a bunch of different hats in the world, but I'm here tonight as someone who organizes with the Shelter and Housing Justice Network. But most importantly, I am a neighbor. I live in this area. My dog loves the Moss Park supervised consumption sites. People will know my dog's name and have no idea who I am. And so I'm here just because I deeply care about this community, and I'm worried about what gentrification has been doing and continues to do. I am a Chinese Canadian, or a Canadian, or a Canadian. The daughter to a solo mother. And I think that's really framed my understanding and questions in terms of housing, because as the daughter of a racialized woman, I am very aware that I could have ended up being in a situation where I ended up in a shelter or had to rely on a food bank, but that's not what happened. And I ask a lot of questions about why that's the case. And I think that's really framed a lot of the work that I am passionate about today. And I know Walied was just talking about, housing is a human right. But I'm increasingly believing that we live in a world where certain groups of people are just not considered human enough to even deserve human rights. People who are unhoused, precariously housed, people who are substance users, people who are migrants, asylum seekers who are not white or white passing, people who are incarcerated. So yeah, we all say that housing is a human right, but I actually think that we don't live in a world where everybody is actually humanized. And this is something that we see at all levels of government. Because at the city level, we have a government that says they want to adopt, quote, a human rights approach to encampments. And what that has looked like is that they've spent millions and millions of dollars on hiring private security guards at various parks across the city. And what are the guards doing? They're standing around telling people to stop setting up tents. That's their jobs. Millions of dollars. They're spending more money on police than housing, resources. A recent report shows that Toronto's tent numbers have increased by 20%. And how the city's, quote, human rights approach to encampments look like is that they just prioritize the parks that get the most complaints. So we saw that at Bellwoods, we see that at Dufferin Grove, we saw that at St. James Park, which is actually happening right now. There's a mobile trailer set up and security patrolling. And what happens is that the parks with the most complaints get the most access to resources. They get to jump the line and get housing before other people I know who've been living in the ravines for 10, 15 years. And this isn't about Olympic oppression or oppression Olympics, in terms of who's been homeless longer. But this is about equity and the city's priority to invisibilize instead of actually dealing with the issues. If you Google Russell and Rosedale Valley, or if you Google Roger and Tent Fire, these are people who got housing the second their story made it on the news. I had known Roger for 10 years. He wasn't even on no housing lists. Then he happened to witness a tent fire. He told his story in the news, and within 2 weeks, he got housed. What? We have a city government that, when recognizing that shelters were full, their solution to make more space was to refuse access to Black asylum seekers. And so what that resulted in was hundreds of people stranded outside 129 Peters Street. And so the Ombudsman did a report on it, highlighted their failure to provide equitable resources and services. And you know what the city did? They refused to adopt the report. We have a city council that is giving airtime to discriminatory groups across the city who are fighting against shelters. At the provincial level, we have a provincial government that's about to reintroduce Bill 242 next week, called the, quote, Safer Municipalities Act, which literally is anything but about safety. The bill will criminalize people who are homeless, giving police expanded powers to evict people who live in tents and arrest people on, quote, suspected drug possession or use. In addition, police are going to be given more powers to entail fines or jail time. And, quote, if there are aggravating factors at hand. And that includes, quote, the likelihood to trespass. Listen, y'all, if you're unhoused, you're probably going back to the same park. And so the province is saying, you know what, we're going to actually punish you and criminalize you and throw you in jail. What has the Ford government done about, healthcare, education? Minimum wage is going up to $17.60 an hour. But rental wage is $43 an hour, and we won't even get into ODSP rates because those are embarrassingly shameful. What has the Ford government done about that? Federally, I'm sorry if you loved the federal election debates, but they were so boring. Also, I learned nothing. That was not what I planned to say. I'm sorry. Federal, right. At the federal level of the government, there's so much talk about, securing our borders, right? Securing our borders is just a way to scapegoat people. Once again, we're hearing the federal government scapegoat immigrants and asylum seekers and migrant workers because, they're the ones causing the housing crisis. But actually, if you look at the Canadian census, more than half of these groups of people live in poverty. Y'all, they're not buying housing. The federal government is framing the danger as coming from overseas, but I would say the real threat is the people in power themselves. Side tangent, I don't know why the U.S. is still considered a safe third country, but that's a little bit of a side tangent. The federal government talks about being, quote, tough on crime in the form of tougher jail sentences and no bail for violent offenders. But, I think what the real flex on being tough on crime is actually, healthcare, housing, food, livable wages. But none of them have talked about this. The real crime is that people are stealing to live. The feds are talking about removing taxes to first-time home buyers, but sir, I can't even pay my rent, so I don't know how cutting GST on a home buying situation is helping nobody. Carney is talking about, quote, wartime housing efforts to build, but okay, sir, how long is this going to take? But also, this is not actually addressing the financialization of housing, which is how we got here in the first place. Because listen, y'all, I started working in the community back in 2010. And back then, when people would be like, hey, Lo, like, I'm trying to get housing, can we look? We'd be like, yeah, let's go on the Craigslist and, like, see what I just said the Craigslist, that's weird. Let's go online and, like, see what we can find. And sometimes we might be able to find a room or something. And sometimes we had to be weird about it and go to these places, and we didn't say that I was a worker, because landlords would get all funny about someone having a worker. But now when someone says, hey, Lo, let's try to find housing, I like try to change the topic because we're not finding anything online. But also, let's talk about landlords, because how do they have so much power to just discriminate freely however they want? A recent report in March by the Canadian Centre of Housing Rights and Brock University did a joint report that shows that landlords across Canada are more likely to ask personal questions and reject prospective renters who identify as racial minorities, newcomers, and people with children. Also, there's a lot of conversations we hear about rent subsidies. Oh, we want rent subsidies. Here's the thing. Landlords know about rent subsidies, okay? So landlords are now charging $3,000 for a shoebox because they know that y'all have access to COB and they can just take that COB money. I have seen this firsthand with organizations, Homes First, for instance, who have access to certain landlords who'll be like, hey, I got a room for rent, but you got COB, right? So I'm going to charge you $3,000 for a little shoebox room that has no private kitchen or anything like that. Also, what happens when subsidies run out? Because COB is supposed to be 5 years only per person. So, like, after 5 years, is a person supposed to just magically make $50 an hour to make rent? What's the plan here? The subsidies also are just really making landlords rich. And so here's the thing. I actually really, really hate this argument, but I'm going to say it anyway. Even if we didn't care about people, it's just more expensive to keep this going. Hospitals, jails, shelters, all of this just costs way more money. So I was supposed to talk about wins. And I'm going to be really honest, I really struggled. I feel a little bit like Eeyore in the room, like the sad womp womp. But I've been thinking, you know, when the asylum seekers were stuck outside 129 Peter Street, we saw a massive effort to support people outside. And then even after people were moved into church spaces, the work continued to push the city council to adopt the ombudsman recommendations. I think about right now how there's pockets of neighbors in different cities that are organizing to welcome and support the new shelters that are coming into their neighborhoods. I also think about actually just across the street at Moss Park nearly 10 years ago, when supervised consumption sites were not a thing here yet, a whole pile of us organized and set up an illegal, unsanctioned supervised consumption site in the park. And then we fought really hard, and supervised consumption sites became a thing, and then now they're just pulling it out from under us. I told you I was Eeyore. So yeah, I want to end this with the same energy that Chiara had. But if I'm really honest, I'm really, really angry. And I'm really, really sad that everything is such a fucking fight. I'm really frustrated. And I also know that the state just wants us to give up, and I'm just too petty to do that, so we're just gonna keep fighting. But I guess the question, though, is what are we fighting for? And so, yes, I would say we are fighting for housing. And I look around the room and I'm encouraged because I know, like, Gaetan and John, Barrick, y'all have been doing this, like, way before. And I really appreciate the intergenerational work that this is. But what are we fighting for? Yeah, we're fighting for housing, but I actually would hope that we're fighting for an intersectionality approach to housing. That the people who are welcomed at the table are not just, quote, activists, but I want to see my brothers who are incarcerated at this table as well to talk about what it is that they need. And I think all of this comes back to an understanding of land. And I'll wrap with this. One of the most worst experiences that I've ever had was sitting at a city meeting where they started the meeting with a land acknowledgement, and then they proceeded to talk about how they were going to deal with encampments. when we look at land as a commodity to own rather than a treaty to steward, that's settler colonialism. That's what happened on Turtle Island. That's what continues to happen here. And it's what's happening in Palestine. We cannot talk about housing without talking about what's happening to our neighbors outside of Toronto as well. And so just as one body has many parts, I believe organizing requires people to play different parts. We're not all going to march the streets. We need some people to march and some people to watch the kids. We need some people to cook, and we need some people to fill the legal spaces. We need some people to make some money, y'all, because we need money to fund our movements. So if you do have money, please join Resource Movement. I just want to plug that. Everybody plays a role, and I hope that we can all find a space this weekend to figure out what our role might look like. I can't be here tomorrow because one of my brothers is getting out. He's been inside for over 1.5 years. He was charged for break and entering because he broke into an abandoned building because he was homeless. So tomorrow he's going to be released to the same abandoned building where I will bring him a tent and a sleeping bag and Hawaiian pizza. May our rage drive us into action and Palestine will be free.
Thanks very much. I'm John Clarke, and I'm a member of 230 Fightback, and I'm going to be speaking in that capacity. Obviously, from what we've heard and from what we see in this room, we come from many different communities, and we're involved in many different forms of struggle. But it's all, in a certain sense, part of the same struggle, because we're all up against the same thing. And David Harvey in the film looked at the cityscape, and we can do the same right out of this window. See, what we're seeing out there is a monument to destructive greed and inequality and injustice. If you look at those luxury facilities that have gone up, they're all individual monuments to greed and recklessness and social exclusion, every single one of them. And I think they're pretty ugly, as a matter of fact. Because they're not part of a community. They're all individual commodities stuck up there for somebody to make profits out of. And in the midst of that, if you know where to look, you can see evidence of the other side of the question. You can see the shelters for unhoused people. You can see the people in alleyways. You can see the cops maintaining social control on the people that have been pushed down. You can see the racism. You can see the injustice. You can see it all. It's there. You can see the shortened lives, and you can see the misery. And it's all part of the city that's being created. And it's all part of a city that we're not prepared to live in, and we're not prepared to tolerate, and that we have to change. That's fundamentally what we're up against. Now, we come together from different perspectives, but one thing I think unites us. We can no longer go on accepting a situation where housing is provided as a commodity for people to profit off of. We can no longer accept a situation where housing is provided by developers who don't give a shit about human lives. We can no longer put up with that. We can no longer tolerate it, and what we want is for housing to be recognised as a social need, and, accepting Lorraine's qualification, a human right. That means a right for all human beings. It means something that has to be respected, and it means something that has to become a reality in this city. But the point is this: we can say this, and it isn't as if the developers are all going to rush in here and say, oh my God, what have we done wrong? We're so sorry. That's not going to happen. What we have to build is we have to build a movement that is strong enough, a movement that's powerful enough, a movement that they hate, and that's fine, but a movement that they fear, and that's very, very important. Because I guarantee they didn't respond to the rent strike because they finally realised they were not just people and they wanted to be nicer. They did it because tenants demonstrated that they had power. And that's what we have to have. We have to have power. And we have to build power in our communities. And that's what this assembly is all about, is building power. Building a counter power to their power, our power. And so we have to confront that power of the developers. And as has been pointed out, they have a lot of connections, they have a lot of money, they have a lot of resources, but there aren't really that many of them when all's said and done. And there's lots and lots of us. And so we've got the potential to build a counterpower. But that means really, as well, that we must confront not just the developers, but we must confront what I would describe as their political enablers. Because this city is full of those people. This city is full of politicians who, of various stripes. Some are overt reactionaries. Some, like Doug Ford, sit at home and wait for the developers to show up with cash-filled envelopes. There's those kinds. But then there's also the progressive ones. There's also the ones who talk a good line. There's also the ones who could come here tonight and say very poignant things about how unjust society is. But when push comes to shove, they give in to the developers. They enable the developers. They enable the corporate landlords. And that includes, I must say, the people operating out of the mayor's office. We can't deny it. It's part of the reality of the situation. You know, we are taking up a fight at 214, 230 Sherburn. It's a place that has disgustingly stood empty for, now it's approaching 2 decades. 2 decades that land in an area of the city where housing is desperately needed stands empty. And in comes king-set capital, and they buy it up, they outbid the city, and then they say they're going to build a luxury condominium. And we went after them. We went after them with great enthusiasm and great determination. We invaded their offices. We picketed their events. We laid siege to the mayor's office. We occupied the site. We did all kinds of things, and ultimately, based largely on market conditions as well, they said, okay, we're prepared to sell it back to the city. But they, of course, want to cover the cost of their speculative antics, and they've named some outrageous price. So the city could get it back from them if a price was offered. But, of course, the city will not put any pressure on them to do that. Instead, the city continues to grease the wheels of king-sat profit-making at every turn, again and again and again. And that is an enormous injustice that we can't tolerate. And that's what we've got to stand up against. Because, of course, as has been alluded to by a number of people here, finally, this disgusting, obscene, speculative bubble built by investors and parasites and all the rest of them, what we now have is a situation where that thing is bursting. And all of a sudden, the investors are walking away. And all of a sudden, the condo developments are not being built. And all of a sudden, people are walking away from their the condo units that they bought and that they're in crisis. So what is their solution? It's to look for a new scam. It's to go to the city and say, okay, well, how about we build upscale rental units instead? Give us money, give us land, and we'll do that, and it'll save our asses for us. And the city looks like it's going to play that game, and we can't allow that. We can't allow that for a moment. We've got to challenge them. We've got to actually create a situation where we dare to put forward real demands and fight for them. As well, as has also been pointed out, and this is very important for us to recognise, the impact of the trade war is going to be enormous on our communities. It's going to mean rampant price increases. It's going to mean job losses. It's going to be very, very serious. And in that situation, you can bet your life that every level of government is going to the failed corporations and the bankrupt employers, and they're going to say, what do you need? Do you need a bailout? Do you need a handout? Well, we have to be prepared to say, where is our bailout and where is our handout? We want one too. Right? And we have to put forward a series of fighting demands that reflect that in all sorts of areas. I see that Justice for Workers is talking about a workers' agenda in the trade crisis. We need a housing agenda as well, a very, very definite housing agenda. We need to be demanding real rent controls. We need to be demanding a moratorium on economic evictions. We need to be saying, stop rubber stamping the obscene development plans of the agendas. And above all else, put resources, and I'm not talking about tokens here, shift public resources massively to the creation of social housing all across the country. Stop pretending that the solution to the crisis facing communities is to incentivize developers and speculators and parasites. That isn't going to solve the problem at all. There has to be a real commitment to transferring public land and public resources to building rent geared to income social housing that people need. It's absolutely essential. So in the meeting tomorrow, there's going to be very, very concrete discussions about how we proceed, how we move forward, how we organise, what the issues are. But it comes down to this, and I've already made the point, but I'm going to emphasise it. We can complain, and we can critique, and we can analyse all we like, and it will make no difference. What is required is a movement that can put forward demands and back it up with a programme of action. That means it has to be large enough, it has to be a mass movement, that means it has to advance really serious and powerful demands, and it has to be uncompromising, it has to be disruptive. What we have to create is a movement that can challenge the developers and their development projects, that can actually challenge the city politicians, that can create for them a mobilised movement of poor working class people that can create a political crisis for those who are in power. When we've done that, we're going to have a movement strong enough to make a difference. So I'm going to quote no less a figure than Mark Carney, a certain former central banker. And Mark Carney says, we are facing the greatest crisis of our lives. Well, you're going to face it a little differently, chum, to the way people in our communities are going to face it, but I don't disagree. Yes, we are facing an enormous crisis. If we're facing a crisis, we need to organise, we need to draw on the lessons of struggles that have gone on, and we have to build a movement that is powerful enough and strong enough and determined enough and relentless enough to win the right to housing in this city. Thank you very much indeed.
Thanks. Thank you, everybody. This is wonderful. One quick announcement before we go to questions. Yeah, somebody asked to make a quick announcement, so, and then we'll go spend the next 25 minutes or so talking with...
Thank you so much. Hello, everybody. My name is Samuel, and I'm a member organizer with an organization called Justice for Workers. And yeah, I'm here. I want to tell you a little bit about our current campaign, which is called the No One Left Behind campaign. The No One Left Behind campaign is basically a campaign to organize public support to pressure the governments, all levels of governments, to implement policies that would support workers and our communities during the tariff crisis, like John just mentioned earlier. And, you know, we are all currently in the midst of tariff crisis, and many Canadians have already lost their jobs, starting with like auto workers and steel workers. I read the news earlier on my way here in the subway, and it says that employment level in Canada has increased to 6.7%, and within the last month alone, 36,000 people have lost their jobs, and that is the highest number of job loss since January 2022. And so far, the response from our governments is to prioritize businesses, right? Doug Ford, for example, has announced 11 billion financial relief for businesses, none for the workers. Another response from the government is to give the extraction companies basically a green light to build mines and pipelines and, you know, exploit our environment. And also another response is from the current federal government, and all the political parties have also promised to increase our military spending and also to build, to increase spending on border controls, hire more CBSA officers, our CMP officers, buying drones, and none of these policies will be helpful for the working class during the crisis. So our campaign is to pressure the governments to implement policies that will actually support our communities. So policies such as to increase the EI to $600 per week, so that when workers lost their jobs, they can actually survive in dignity while looking for a new job, right? We also demand the government to improve EI so that it can cover all workers. Doesn't matter if you're like part-time workers, migrant workers, contract workers. If you lost your job, you can access EI. We also demand rent control, freeze on evictions, freeze on food price increase, because as we all know, during the crisis, people like Gallen Weston will use it as an excuse to increase food prices, to get richer while we're struggling to buy food, right? We're also asking for government to increase funding to our public services like healthcare, education, child service, childcare, and to increase public funding on infrastructure, including building more deeply affordable housing. So if you agree with our demands, an immediate action you can do right now is you can send an email to your MP and MPP's candidates by using the link on the flyers that I gave earlier there, to tell them that they need to endorse these demands, right? But that's not all. Because if they get elected and get into power, we want to keep pressure them and encourage them to actually fight for these demands, right? And so we also have a sign-up sheet over there for our petition. And if you can sign, you can give your information. And if you can take the Join Us box, so you can like maybe help us doing outreach, because we need to talk to more people. We need to build mass movement to pressure the government to actually care about the workers and not just the businesses. Thank you.
Look at this. That's it. 2 mics. I'm ready to go. I'm going to do this question and answer a little different if the panelists don't mind too much. I want to know who's here tonight. So if you raise your hand, I'll give you the mic. You can tell us where you're from and maybe talk about some organizing that you see in your community, if people are up for it. I don't know if people are up for it. And that would give us a sense of who's in this room. But also, if you have a question, you're welcome to ask the question to some of the panelists. But sometimes, we have people up front, but the people here, although I know some of the people, people are anonymous to me. It would be nice to hear who has come out tonight, because we've worked hard to bring you out. We'd like to know who you are. So are people up for that? Or okay, yeah, okay. So if you lift up your hand and I'll bring a mic to you, and then and we'll go from there. Okay, Janice wants to go first. I happen to know this one. Yeah. There you go, Janice. Just. Yeah.
I'm Janice. Wally, you-hoo, I'm here.
What's that?
I ain't standing up. Well, for me, it's more organizing, right, Barrett? Yes.
That one she's done. Yeah.
Yeah.
One second.
Am I good to go?
Yeah, go.
Oh, I go. Sorry. My name is Aiden Braithwaite with Climate Justice Toronto. Thank you to the. Sure. Yeah. Awesome. So in terms of organizing, so we've been trying to organize various buildings in the city and kind of expand the scope of that work. So really excited to hear about efforts being done by others in similar kind of pursuits. I can ask a question too, right? That's part of the, okay.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah,
awesome. Yeah, I want to ask a question about prejudice within organizing and movement building, and I really appreciate Lorraine and Walied for centering, intersectionality in the work that we're doing and wanting to make housing more accessible. I think especially with unhoused folks, I think it's really important to center and to direct our anger towards, financiers, the corporate class, but we can't ignore the fact that there is a lot of prejudice amongst, a large portion of the population towards unhoused folks, towards other sorts of communities. When the encampment clearings happened in Bellwoods, the area surrounding Bellwoods, which would have spurred that, is not, certainly relative a lot of privilege, but I wouldn't say it's the wealthiest part of the city. And so I'm just wanting to know people's thoughts and strategies about how do we confront that prejudice and wanting to bring more people into the fold, including people who may have prejudicial views, but will need to be part of that majority. We need to demonstrate to achieve effective change. So thanks.
Does anybody want to answer, speak to that at all? The mic's right there, Walied. Here you go, Mike.
That's actually an excellent question. So as a community organizer, one thing that I've learned is organizing, we call it a cycle, right? Educate, agitate, organize. But it starts off in every movement, the student movement, the labor movement, environmental movements, and there needs to be cross-collaboration amongst movements as a strategy, but it has to be data-driven. One of the things that I appreciate is, when folks were saying, anti-black racism is real, right? It was not a thing. Folks now appreciate this anti-black racism or white supremacy, but back then, it was just racism. There was no discussion of intersectionality. And I think it is also a thread that connects movements. Food insecurity is felt in the student movement. Food insecurity is felt in our communities. Food insecurity is felt in every aspect of life. It's not normal, my friends. This is not supposed to be the norm, but it's becoming our relative memory. So I think we need to challenge that. We need to remind ourselves of our victories, and we need to start being evidence-based so that there's no one that could deny it. I don't want to say Trumpism, like what's going on south of the border where people actually misrepresent things, even data, for their own ambitions. Look what's going on right now with tariffs, avoiding evidence-based things, and that's going to hurt our economies. But now this gives us an opportunity to start thinking about the future, not just the current crisis. So I think that's the attitude that I want to invite everyone in this room to think about, is how we're collaborating with other movements, how we're addressing anti-black racism, anti-indigenous racism, when it comes to Islamophobia, when it comes to the LGBTQ2 plus community, when it comes to the fact that, I come from, a community that is heartbroken because of greed and this unchecked, ambitious global conflict that has affected so many communities that live in Canada. So you also have to think about the trauma that impacts members of our communities. And when we talk about mental health, we talk about all these other pieces that are interconnected to all these movements. You'll find a way where people actually want to show up and take action. And I just want to thank everyone on the panel because they're demonstrating that it is possible. Because I want you all to believe that, you folks actually are going to bring about those future victories. It's you working with your neighbors, having those important conversations tomorrow to really bring about many victories that we can claim to be major victories in the long term. Thank you.
Okay, I'm Michael Rosenberg. I've been working with groups in Kensington Market and Regent Park mostly. It's really something that I've been working on for a long time, to be concerned about how technology is actually a negative factor. And now it's really coming to it. Like, you see how everybody is starting to recognize that technology really is literally taking over, and they just don't know what to do about it or how to address it, because it doesn't have a place in any economic theory that was ever supposed to happen. But it was always understood by people who invented the computers that we would eventually get to this point, and we're now there. It's bad for the economy. The computers are using resources, but not producing anything really. And it's literally getting to the point that people have predicted, which is that the computers would run themselves and take over completely. So I'm just like, when you see stuff like that, and you will hear and see more and more of that kind of thing happening, when you see something that you think actually needs to be stopped, try to get it stopped.
Good evening. My name is Miss Mark, and I'm from the Crisis in Our City. I'm one of the co-founders. First of all, I would really like to thank you for the amazing presentation that you have presented today. I see some of our participants here. Maybe you can raise your hands, and I can show like how many people we have at the Crisis in Our City. I see David, Walied, Peter. Yeah, there are a few more. I see like one of the things that we need to do is organize more. Crisis in Our City is a coalition of, it's a network, and it's people who are in the field, entities that are working in homelessness and shelter are part of it. And I would like to invite you to come and join us. It's a bi-weekly meeting, and it's basically focusing on advocacy. We have done so much since the inception, like 2 years. So basically what I wanted to say is there's so many people here working in homelessness and housing. And our motto is like, there should not be no one left outside. There should not be any reason that the shelter cannot provide space to curb homelessness. And this is what I wanted to say. Thank you so much.
Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, and check out all of our social media platforms. For more information, check out our website.